Hi, this is Chuck Stull looking at the retail sector of the oil industry, gasoline retailing. Now, crude oil has a lot of market power. Both the oil majors and the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, have power in that sector. Refining is also very concentrated and a lot of market power held by the big oil companies, by the majors. Retailing has a little different structure. And gas stations don't have the same kind of market power that a oil refinery company might have. If we look at gasoline retailing, its structure can be broken into two separate groups, somewhat like refining. So we have major brands that are heavily advertised, things like Exxon, Shell, or Texaco. These are often national or multinational brands. And then we have the independent brands that are less advertised, that may be local or regional. Sometimes these are referred to as discount brands. Now we see the different brands, but the brands don't necessarily um, relate to the ownership of the individual gas stations. Most gas stations are operated by independent businesses, either a single station or a small chain of stations. So just because there is a Shell or Exxon or BP brand on the station doesn't mean that those companies own the gas station. Typically, be owned by a local owner who's operating under a franchise agreement with the refinery. Now, a franchise is an interesting vertical arrangement. These are companies that are not fully vertically integrated. The retailer is its own firm with its own profits and losses, but they are not fully independent. They operate under long-term contractual agreement with protections on both sides. If we look a little at the economics of franchises, one of the important um, issues here is what are the incentives it provides for the station owner. Right? The station owner is going to be the one making profits or losses from the operation of the gas station. Now, a station owner, because they have that profit incentive, has um, a real incentive to provide good service, to have clean and attractive gas station, and to control their costs, to make sure that they have the right amount of merchandise and the right amount of employees. And um, those are things that could be done by an Exxon or a BP or a Shell, but their monitoring cost would be much, much more expensive. By separating the ownership of the retailers, the monitoring can just be done locally as opposed to having to report back to a central multinational company. Overall, there have been a shrinking number of gas stations, um, and a growing number of stations are owned by the refining, but still a relatively small percentage are fully vertically integrated. Now, if we look at the market characteristics specifically of gasoline retailing, we see something that looks very different than the oligopoly of refining or extracting oil. In gasoline retail, we see many competing sellers. There is relatively easy entry and exit. There are differentiated products. So some people are willing to pay more for a particular brand of oil. Some will go to places that have better service, and probably location where the gas retailer is located is most important. People are likely to take an exit off a highway and get gas there as opposed to drive all through an unfamiliar city looking for cheaper gas. So location can be really important here. And then many gas stations now include convenience stores and may make the bulk of their money on food, drinks, and cigarettes as opposed to the gasoline, which has a very small markup. So if we look at all of these, we see something that looks very much like a monopolistically competitive industry, right, where each company faces its own downward sloping demand curve. But there is one element that looks a little bit more like oligopoly. In many places, we have gas stations who are close to a small number of other retailers. And so then we might see rivalry amongst those specific local sellers. Sometimes you'll have gas stations where you can see the price of two different or up to four or more different retailers all in the same place. And in those cases, we rarely see the kind of price difference that's shown in this photo. Typically, companies will match each other's prices, and so if Shell is selling for $1.74, BP will lower their price to match that. And that would be a key element of oligopoly, at least a very local oligopoly, which is that interdependence um, between the local retailers. There's all kinds of theories we could look at to explore this, but I think we'll have to save those for a later presentation. Thank you for listening. This has been Chuck Stull from Kalamazoo College talking about the retail gas sector.